Women with more sexual partners have a much higher probability of unhappiness and divorce.
Yep.
Behind every successful man is a woman. Well, women don't stand behind unsuccessful men. Women have very strong preferences for men. And if you don't meet those preferences, you're not going to be chosen.
What are some of society's comforting lies?
Happy wife, happy life. The vast majority of the incarcerated, the vast majority of teenage pregnancies, it's a contribution towards gang activity, poor grades in school. They come primarily from not toxic masculinity, but from a total absence of masculinity. And even the fathers that are around in the household, a lot of them are like furniture.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? Welcome back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Today, I am live in studio with a guy who I have known to some degree for many years. He's actually been on the podcast before. It's our first time meeting in person, and it's here in the wonderful city of Dubai, my now home. He is an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's got a big following online with over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. And he's just a real guy. And this is Real Talk with Zuby, so we're going to have a real conversation. And without further ado, this is Rich Cooper. Welcome to the show.
Let's do it, man. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome, man. Well, Rich, for my listeners who maybe didn't hear our last episode or who aren't familiar with you and your work, I've done a little intro there, but how do you describe yourself?
Oh, it depends what you want to talk about. You want to talk about cars? You want to talk about the stuff that I read about in my books and my videos? I think I'm most known for helping guys understand the reality of the world in which it actually works, not the way that they've been told it to operate for them. And there's often a disconnect, and I call that process unplugging. So I'm like the title of my book is Unplugged Alpha, the first one. So I tend to help guys to unplug from society's comforting lies to get the results that they want out of life.
Tell me about your life path that got you to the stage where this is an area of interest, focus, and work for you.
I think it's one of those things where you have to make your wounds your work eventually at some point as a guy. A lot of the times we subscribe to maybe a safe world theory. It's often a house of cards. And it tends to collapse when you ego invest too deeply in beliefs and ideas that don't work for you. So for me personally, I found that it was probably around the age of about 39, 40 or so, I found myself in a position where I found a good deal of success in my business. I was an entrepreneur, many employees, received awards. I was married at the time, built a fantastic custom home, healthy new child in my life. But everything wasn't what everybody thought it was, if you know what I mean. Like, they look at you like, oh, your life's perfect. You're married to a lawyer. Everything's great sort of thing. But it wasn't. And I quickly needed to figure out why. And I'm the kind of guy that holds myself accountable. I try never to play the victim in the chaos that I create. And I always look for like the story behind the story, like why did things operate that way? Why did I believe this? And then get that sort of thing. So, to get right to the point of that, I made my wounds my work. And I decided to figure out, well, why aren't women responding to me on a long-term basis the way that I was told that they should? Mm-hmm. Why am I not able to maintain certain types of relationships the way that I'm told that they should exist if I do certain things? So that was a bit of a discovery process. I read a lot of books, watched a lot of videos, talked to a lot of people, built my own community around the idea. Yeah, it was a very interesting process to unplug myself.
Yeah. What was your growing up like? Because obviously that sets the basis for a lot of our beliefs. And it sounds like you went through this process of what you called unplugging, where you shifted your belief system in response to everything that was happening in your own life. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know a little bit about the before part.
Yeah, I was born in the UK. We moved to Canada when I was young. 2-parent household, my entire life. Mm-hmm. Typical family, 3 brothers, mom and dad. Dad worked a lot. Mom worked when dad came home. I think my dad did most of the parenting when we were kids. Like my dad was around us mostly because he was always around the weekends when my mom worked. And, so I was fortunate enough to have a lot of positive masculinity, I guess, around me. Did a lot of male stuff. My dad kind of forced me as the firstborn to do a lot of the stuff around the house, lead my brothers, take them out, help them in the garden. The roof needed reshingling or insulation in the attic. I was there crawling around in the corners at 7 or 8 years old doing stuff like that. So to some degree, I had a very difficult life. It's not one that I would want to change. Like I was happy with it. In hindsight, at the time I hated it. My friends would get an allowance. I'd have to work to make money. They wanted the keys to the cars, no problem. I had to polish the car for 3 hours before I could take it out. So it was different for sure. But I think that the difficulties and the toughness that my dad forced upon me as a firstborn, as a kid. I mean, he took it easier on my brothers, obviously. Made me the guy that I am today. And it's a good thing. It's a tough thing when you're a kid, but it's a good thing in hindsight to be difficult or strict with your children.
Where's your dad from?
UK, born in England. My dad's essentially Viking descent, mom's Greek, Italian style, I guess, from DNA heritage.
I'm always interested to know about people's sort of family dynamics and growing up, especially when people talk about the kind of things you do,
Yeah.
Men, women, masculinity, femininity, gender dynamics, all that kind of stuff. It's always interesting to hear the backstory because everyone obviously speaks from their perspective. People speak from their perspectives, from their experiences. We do our best to, some of us do our best to try to empathize with other people and see where they're coming from. But I think without knowing some degree, their backstory, then what they're saying in the moment doesn't always make sense, because if someone's coming from a very different perspective or a different set of experiences, then there's this, unless there's real genuine empathy, I mean this in the true term, like understanding someone else's perspective, there's this disconnect where they
curiosity is great. I
misunderstand each
think you
other.
have to get curious about people's lives and their origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. So how old were you when you got married?
That's a great question. I think I was mid-early 30s, 33, 34 or so.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a good deal of success in my debt negotiation business, got lots of awards, nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young. We were doing real well, and I had met a gal online, on a dating app. She was a professional lawyer. She did real well herself. So we decided to do the right thing and get married and start a family.
Yeah. Dating app,
yeah. I think
okay. What year was that?
Question. 2000. I got married in 2009, so it was whatever was popular back then. I can't remember.
Okay, interesting.
Maybe it was Lava Life or something like that. Probably dating myself.
Yeah. Okay. And so a few years into that, I mean, when did things start to go wrong or
Very
come
quickly.
apart at this?
Very quickly. Yeah. It's like, there's an old saying that I talked about this in my first book. They hire you for your resume, but they fire you for fit in business. And I think the same is true in a lot of relationships too. Like you'll like the optics of somebody, they're beautiful. They seem to have things together. They don't bring baggage or drama. But as time sort of goes on and you spend more time together and you get familiar and you start to have a lot of proximity, and you don't have a lot of frame, I think that Western women are very difficult for men to manage, and there's no real program or a course or something that sort of explains how to sort of deal with the modern woman today. Things can get very frustrating, and I realized pretty early on, in a few years, I was like, I'm not going to be able to fix this. This is just not something that's a good fit. I remember having a conversation with my family doctor at the time because I was doing blood labs, and she was asking me how things go and this and that. You look real stressed. And then we started talking about the relationship and marriage, and she said, well, what I've learned is that the best time to get divorced, if you're going to do it, is when the kids are small or after they've grown up. And I just had my daughter at the time; she was small, so I figured, all right, I don't think I can fix this. This is just the time to do it now.
Yeah. Are you happy to go? You're happy to be transparent and go.
Yeah, I'll tell you if we got to stop on anything.
Yeah,
You can edit
okay.
that
Yeah,
out.
no, because I think it's important for people to hear these conversations.
Yeah, of course.
Right, and I'm at this weird but cool intersection where in the podcasting, social media world, I seem to be one of the few people who genuinely talks to everyone. As someone who's got a more sort of right-leaning, conservative faith, I'd say Christian audience, predominantly. There's that sphere, and people kind of all speak within there. And then, I'm at the intersection of a lot of worlds, but then there's the world of the what some people would call the manosphere or the red pill, and I've been on all these podcasts, and I've spoken to and broken bread with so many people influential on not kind of on both sides of this
I
fence.
think you have to, otherwise it turns into an echo chamber.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people
they're
don't.
afraid to touch on a lot of different topics.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of agreement from these worlds. Let's, I don't know, to call it the tradcon world and the red pill world, if you, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
And there's this, there's kind of constant mudslinging towards each other. And oftentimes I think people are sort of saying similar things in different ways or just coming from slightly different perspectives. And there's this funny thing that happens is, like if you do a lot of podcasts, people have this idea of like, oh no, you don't talk to
you
people.
Can't
try to
touch that person.
You can't talk to that person, or you can't go into this topic because people think that like if we talk about what we're saying now, that like I've had people be like, oh, Zuby is it's the craziest thing I've heard. I've had people say like Zuby's anti-marriage. First of all, I'm married.
Interesting.
And it's because he spoke to that person.
Yeah.
So okay, so because I got that perspective and we went into that topic, that now means that against this thing. It happens politically, right? You go on conservative shows and now
everybody likes routines. That's why you see these guys in the stadium with the sweaters and the face paint, and they want to kill each other over a disagreement on a call.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
I'm like, I want people to understand the world.
Yeah,
and I think you come from that perspective. That's something I like.
I try to. Like, I don't affiliate myself with anything in particular. Whether it's Tradcon or Manosphere. There's actually a chapter in my new book. I called it the Manoswamp to sort of explain the dynamics that operate within that environment, because I spent some time with some of those guys for a few years. And I don't put myself in a category. Some people like to put me in a category, but just like, look, I am my own guy and I do what I do, and I do what's best for me, and I teach guys to do what's best for them. Yeah.
Maybe you just summed it up right there, but what would you say is your overall goal that you want people to get from your work and all the videos and books you put out there?
I mean, a lot of the times I see people say, you're like the cool uncle that I wish I had when I was growing up, or, you're like the father that I never had, or I wish I knew this sort of stuff 20 years ago. So I guess like, for me, a lot of the time the messaging is I want to take vast quantities of information and try to distill it into simple, concise terms so that guys can understand it. And I'm happy to talk to women too. I just find that women typically don't listen until later on in their life when it's a little bit too late. I've had conversations with women for years as well too. But my angle really is to help guys level up and become a better version of themselves and unplug from society's comforting lies and, deal with the cold hard truth and the discomfort that comes with that, do the work on themselves, increase their value. Like, these are the angles that I potentially spend most of my time with these days anyway.
Yeah. What are some of society's comforting lies?
Tons of them. Happy wife, happy life, just be yourself. At some point she'll come along, go along to get along, make yourself less so she can become more. Where do you want to start?
Where do you think that where do you think that programming comes from, and when did it start?
I think men have been conditioned as a function of the West, and I'm seeing some significant differences here in Dubai as I have conversations with a lot of men. A lot of men have been, men of Islam faith. I've spoken to a lot of Christian men as well, obviously, guys that follow the Old Testament versus the New Testament. It seems like men have been predisposed and conditioned to become disposable, soft, agreeable. And I don't know what the origin of that is exactly, but it seems to be some kind of a coordinated, agreeable effort between religion, government, education, Hollywood, popular media, everything they see on screens. It's all kind of doing the same thing, and it's making men softer, weaker, more agreeable, and less attractive to women. I mean, I don't know very many women that are like, oh yeah, I want a weak man, in my life. And as a consequence of that, when you have a lot of softer, weaker men, that creates a little bit of a vacuum, and vacuums fill. So that forces women to become more accountable in their own lives and take ownership for their own, for their mortgages, for their car payments. And that's why you hear women going around today like, I need a man like a fish needs a bicycle, or you don't need a man, or you can't trust men. So it's kind of a horrible dynamic that's actually separating the sexes, right? And it's like, men don't really give women what they want. Women aren't really getting what they want from men. The men that women want to be with don't really want to be with a disagreeable boss girl. And it's like this whole self-fulfilling cycle of just nonsense that's not really working. And I don't see a strong push or an effort by any Western leader whatsoever to make any kind of remedy. And it's wild because, I mean, you talk to a lot of guys that have lived in Dubai or their men are Islamic faith, and they seem to have, I'm not saying it's a perfect system. I mean, there are no perfect systems, obviously, but it seems like they have a better way of navigating life here, which is often criticized, I don't think fairly.
When it comes to skincare, short-term fads don't deliver long-term results. Science does. That's why I use OneSkin. Their formulas are powered by the OS1 peptide, a patented peptide built on longevity science that's proven to target aging at the cellular level. I've been using their OS1 face and OS1 eye products for the last few months, and I love how they help my skin stay looking fresh and healthy, even when my little baby keeps me up at night. OneSkin's products are designed to layer effortlessly and even replace multiple steps in your routine, making long-term skin health simpler and smarter at any age. Born from over 10 years of longevity research, OneSkin's OS1 peptide is proven to target the cells that cause the visible signs of aging, helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. And for a limited time, OneSkin is making it even easier to stay consistent, with up to 30% off your first 3 subscription orders when you use code Zuby at oneskin.co/Zuby. That's up to 30% off with code Zuby at oneskin.co/Zuby. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. It's weird in the West. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues that's happening between men and women is, and this is coming from a societal level, a cultural level, to some degree, even a religious level, sometimes a lack of religious level, is in the West, society wants to have one foot firmly planted in traditionalism and Christian values and chivalry and all of that world, and then another foot firmly planted in feminism, egalitarianism.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Women can do anything men can do, just like this totally secular, liberal, libertine even idea. And there's this constant flip-flopping between the expectations, sometimes from the same person, right? So in one person's mind, men and women are literally exactly the same, to the point that one can turn into the other just by declaring it.
Interchangeable.
But also the expectations from both the men's side and the women's side has a lot of chivalrous and traditionalist aspects, right? On a most basic, simple example is, the idea of who should pay for a date.
Right.
Okay? Because if you're truly in an egalitarian feminist society, right, the idea that it should just be assumed that the man pays, like, why? Right? Or the idea that men should generally defend women or should, kind of give them some sort of special treatment.
Yeah.
That doesn't square with absolute egalitarianism, right? So there's a lot of this cherry picking where it's like, well, I want traditionalism when it suits me, and I want egalitarianism and liberalism when it suits me, and I'm going to just kind of flip back and forth between these two levers whenever I want. And I think it's causing like large scale cognitive dissonance, especially amongst younger people who have less guidance and maybe didn't grow up in a traditional household. Maybe they grew up with no form of religion or faith. They're getting battered from left, right, and center with all of this confusing mixed messaging. I kind of feel sorry for a lot of young men and women in a way, because I'm like, gosh, the roles and expectations have never been so blurry, right? If you're like an 18-year-old guy right now, and it's just like, okay, what is my role as a man supposed to be? On one hand, you're being told, man up, be a leader, earn money, get in shape, be a protector, be a provider, be all of these traditional things. On the other hand, you're being told, no, step down, give women more space. The future is female. Women don't even need you. You need to show your emotions more, bro. You need to cry more. And then, he does cry, and it's like, man up. I'm just like, gosh, I would not want to be, growing up in that type of situation. And then for the women as well, it's extremely mixed messaging. On one hand, it's the, boss girl, you need to earn all your own money. You need to do this. Never rely on a man, so on and so forth.
Never do anything for express pleasure for a man.
Yeah. And then it's also, they're also getting some of the traditional messaging. I'd say they're getting less of it than the men are.
Yeah.
I think there's more of the traditional expectations are being maintained for the male gender overall than they are for the female one. But what's happening is it's not making either happy.
No.
I think we're probably at an all-time high in the West of just male-female dissatisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, women are extremely dissatisfied with men. You know, you hear a lot of media pieces, a lot of social media pieces. I mean, you've seen them. I've seen you share them on X and other platforms where, you know, women are complaining that there's a total lack of marriageable men. Men need to step up. They're financially struggling, blah, 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 right? It's you know, a story that didn't really exist when I was a kid. I mean, you know, maybe that's dating me, but I think in my lifetime, I've seen traditional families shift from, you know, a guy leading the household in that entire, you know, 40, 50 years of my life to it more becoming equal. And you don't hear, you know, my husband or wife that much anymore.
Partner.
Most people, when you talk to them, they'll refer to their husband or their wife, their girlfriend or boyfriend as their partner. And I find myself correcting them all the time.
Only gay people used to do that.
That's exactly, precisely. That's the point. And that's the point that I make, you know, like, you're not a homosexual, you're not running a law firm, you're not a partner, you know, there's a man, there's a woman, there's no like equality in a relationship. Each individual in that union serves a very useful role, and they complement each other, or they should complement each other. They shouldn't try to compete with one another. And I think that, you know, like even in natural societies, when you see men and women sort of resign to, you know, their interests. I mean, like even in egalitarian, you know, societies, you still see women in Sweden, you know, looking for jobs in teaching and nursing.
More so.
Yeah, and men looking for jobs in engineering and, you know, stuff like that. So it's not working. Like we're trying to soften the male, we're trying to masculinize the female, and this entire experiment, in my view, in my eyes, is just a colossal. It's just leading to the destruction of the fabric of society, and it's sad to see, because I think, you know, places like the West. You know, I was talking to Jewel about this the other day. Is, you know, people from Europe and different parts of the world came to North America 250 years ago, and, you know, during that time, because they were looking for greener pastures, they were promised land, they were promised new opportunities, they were promised. You know, more freedom, you know, free from the liabilities of like things that were constraining them in their world at that time. And they've screwed it up over 250 years pretty badly. I mean, it was a slow process, but in the last 50 years, it's just gotten obviously worse.
I think big problems happen when people are afraid to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think, again, one of the big problems I see happening all across the West, this is true in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, UK, Western Europe, is if you really boil it down, feelings have been prioritized over facts.
Yeah.
Emotion has been prioritized over reality. So that causes a lot of problems, but also when it comes to dealing with problems, it's very difficult because you're not even allowed to do the diagnosis. I say you're not allowed, you are, but you get pushback. You get called names, you become labeled controversial. People will call you things you're not just because you can take any issue. It could be immigration, it could be gender dynamics, it could be, it doesn't even matter. Just whatever topic, it's like as soon as you get into something where people start feeling uncomfortable or someone may get offended, or someone out there may not like it, people try to shut it down.
Yeah.
And when that happens consistently, it just metastasizes, right? And so that's why we're, you know, a couple decades later, there are all of these problems that have just gotten out of control.
We need to return to honesty.
Yeah. Just come back to honesty. Yeah.
Obesity is not natural. It's not unhealthy. You're going to have diabetes. You're going to have problems, right? Yeah. You're not. Guys aren't accepted for who they are by women. Women have very strong preferences for men, and if you don't meet those preferences, you're not going to be chosen. Yeah, right. It's, you know, it's just a reality of the world.
That's not a phobia.
Yeah, it's not a phobia.
It's not a phobia. Yeah, I find it fascinating. I think it's starting to turn a corner, but certainly the past 10 years, I'd say from about 2013 or so to about 2023, 2024, I was just on everything, right? We're from the scamdemic to the weird trans issue to all of the crazy feminism, immigration, whatever. I was like, why is everyone just lying all the time? Everyone's just lying all the time about everything. Yeah. To the point where there are people, and I would include myself in this, who have had our rise in popularity largely due to being willing to be honest when most people are lying.
I think you did it when you did the deadlift. Wasn't that the big
Yeah,
thing
that
for
was
you?
7 years ago.
Yeah, 7 years ago when you broke the
And
women's
at
deadlift.
that time, no one wanted to confront that issue.
Yeah.
Right now, people will talk about it, right,
Yeah.
and say, "Okay, this is ridiculous." But
Yeah.
at the time, I'll tell you something, Rich. Like after I did that and it was going viral, I started getting invited to go on all sorts of podcasts and even mainstream media, BBC, Sky News in the UK, and so on. And I remember doing an interview at BBC. And before coming in for the interview, I was in kind of the green room area where you've got the producers and people working and so on, and mostly women, interestingly. And more than one person was like, "Thank you, thank you. This is ridiculous."
Yeah.
Right. So they would never say that publicly.
But why not? Like, that's the question that I have is,
this is the
if that's what you truly believe, why are we still suppressing the truth?
yeah. Why are we playing this game?
Why do we have to dance around the subject
Yeah.
and paint rainbows and butterflies on something that's not it?
Yeah, you're literally saying women and men are the same, and men are, they're. My tweet was literally showing that men are stronger
Yeah.
than women, and simply by identifying as a woman, like this does not change. Like it's not some super profound, deeply, scientific point, but it's just we all knew this until 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Our entire lifetime before we were born, none of our ancestors even questioned this. Before we knew what science was, nobody was questioning this, and now all of a sudden in the 2010s, it's all up for debate.
What do you think the pivotal shift in all that was? I don't want to shift this interview to me interviewing you, but I'm just curious of your thoughts on that.
Which part specifically?
Where things just started, going crazy, where it's like, oh, well, men can compete in women's sports, and that, women can become men and men can become women, and that they're all equal.
I think you can trace this back many decades if someone wants to postmodernism and the Frankfurt School and so on. But I'll tell you where I think it really came to a head, because I've thought about this quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I think you can pinpoint it to the post same-sex marriage legalization era.
Ah, okay.
So if you think about it, certainly in my lifetime,
Yeah.
I'm 39 years old now, and certainly in my own lifetime, up until 10 years ago, the big fight of the left, liberals, progressives, whatever, for most of my life was what they call marriage equality. I would debate that term personally, but I won't go into all of that. But the right for same-sex couples to be legally married. This was happening in the USA, in Canada, in the UK, all across the West. Like in the West, prior to 15-ish years ago, it wasn't legal almost anywhere. That's actually one of the most rapid political shifts I've seen in my lifetime, by the way. And if you think about it, prior to that, like prior to around 2012, I would say that people on the left side of the aisle there was always a group that you could point out that was genuinely discriminated against in the law. Something wasn't equal, right? You can go back to the USA, pre-civil rights, whatever, right? Oh, white people can do this, black people cannot do this. Men can do this, women cannot do this. This group is allowed, this group. There was always some form of, you could say, genuine discrimination in the law and then also societally. And I think that the final thing that someone could reasonably argue is, oh, well, the marriage laws are discriminatory against homosexuals because they're saying, whatever it is. This is not my take.
Yeah.
But I would say that in all of these nations, that was like the last actual fight for quote unquote equality.
Yeah.
And then after that one, like post 2012, like show me what law in Canada, what law in the UK, what law in Germany, wherever, all of these countries, like point me to a law which is like genuinely discriminatory against a group of people based on their immutable characteristics. I don't think you can, right? Maybe it's, unless you're going to get to...
I think they still try to manufacture them, but it's difficult
yeah,
to
but
find something that's
and
a
this is
real
my
problem.
point. So I think that it jumped the shark and it started going crazy with all the trans stuff.
Yeah.
Because they decided that was like the new civil rights frontier.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, we've done the race thing, we've done the gender thing, we've done the sexuality thing, and you've got all these millions and millions of activists, and politicians and groups and NGOs and whatever who are like looking for the next dragon to slay. And they decided for whatever reason to hop on the trans thing. And they were just, for a decade plus are like, all right, this is the one. And I think part of the reason why there was so much pushback is because, well, number one, this is a detachment from reality. But number two, so-called trans people already have all the rights that everyone else does. And they started to then infringe on other people's rights, right? They started to push, no, we need mandatory pronoun laws, and we need to force men into women's sports and bathrooms and changing rooms and this. So that's why there was the pushback, because even from a sort of even to a sane liberal, let's say, to the degree those exist, I believe there are still some. Even they're like, wait, what rights? Like everyone's already equal under the law. Yeah. What are we even doing here? And I think it's hard for people to just kind of put down their activism. And we know there's funding and stuff that goes into all this and just go, we're done. We're done. I can become a conservative now. Let's just maintain this. It's like, no, we got to keep swinging. We got to keep fighting. So I think that's why the wokeness just went super goofy over the last 10 to 15 years, because it just got to that point and, people are looking for the next dragon to slay. And it's not there. That's my belief. And the timing aligns in all of the countries that went down that path. Mm-hmm. The timing seems to align.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to blame it on anything, I would say it's soft men and women getting involved in spaces they shouldn't be involved in. Mm. A return to conventional masculinity and gender roles that have proven to work for thousands of years. I mean, we got this far on that. And, where are we today? We've got birth rates plummeting. We've got the fabric of society falling apart. Like a lot of energy and effort, and especially money, is wasted on resources that aren't really deserving of any attention or money whatsoever. When Elon Musk was doing a whole Doge thing, and I went through the website and like the X feed at one point. I did a podcast on this, and I was kind of going through it, like where the money was going and who it was going to and the amount. Then I found a Canadian website, which, by the way, they took down promptly when that went on social media. And they started exposing how much money was going to the Congo to give like condoms to gorillas or whatever, to promote transgenderism issues in Guatemala or whatever it was. And there is a phenomenal amount of government resources and waste spent on absolute nonsense. Yeah. And they have ridiculous tax rates in most of these Western countries where like talent is fleeing. Yep. I can't, I've lost count of how many people I've spoken to here in Dubai, and it's not even been a week, that are just like, I've left the West. Yep. I'm not interested. I don't want them to rob me of my wealth, to spend it on policies and programs that I disagree with, that continue to destroy society. Yeah. So I've, like you said, I vote with my wallet, I vote with my feet, and, it's clear that the direction things are going. It's unfortunate because a lot of these places are beautiful. The funny thing about Canada, where I live, is it's a resource-rich country. Mm. Oil, gas, lumber, fresh water, mineral rights. I mean, I could keep going. It's one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, but it's continuing to fall on a regular basis on the G7 list. It's its economic output is horrible. I think that the richest province in Canada is poorer than the poorest state in the U.S., which I believe is Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. The GDP, the wealth of the state and the nations. It's just a phenomenal experiment that nobody is making a real effort to correct. Yeah, you see some executive orders, from the President of the United States to get men, like trans men, out of the military, and there's no more story time, kid hour, and certain
the environments. Drag queen story hour.
Drag queen story hour. So you see some of it. Executive orders, but I just think the pendulum's going to swing back the other way. There's not a serious enough effort from the public to follow that new movement. There's a lot of outcry. There's, if they disagree with something, they'll just point and sputter some idea, and they'll call them racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, whatever it happens to be, hoping to sort of scare off the movement. But there's no strong resiliency anymore towards any of the nonsense. I personally, I think the only solution to all this is some kind of a segregation where like the lefties go on their side of the country, the righties go on their side of the country, and it's like, let's see how that experiment unfolds after 20 years. Yeah, man, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I think, again, in many ways, I think the West has been a victim of its success. Yeah.
I think that the
It's
bigger.
too successful, and it looks for demons that don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that absolutely. People creating problems which are not problems. And also, I think that, we were talking about this detachment from reality. I think that on an individual and on a nation level, the more of a cushioning you have, then the longer you can get away with ignoring reality. Okay, so if there's a lot of money, wealth, safety, then you can espouse bad ideas. You can talk, hey, transgenderism, communism, blah, blah, and you go back to your bubble. Nothing changes. You're pretty safe. Like, you're prosperous. The supermarket has food. Whatever. You can float whatever nonsense idea you want if you're comfortable. But in most of the world, people often forget. Like, I don't know what the percentage is, but probably under 20% of the world's population lives in what we call the West. Might be under 15%. Right. So 85% of the world is still very much rooted in reality. All across South America, Central America, Africa, Asia. Even Eastern Europe, people are very much rooted in reality. And in those places which are not so prosperous, not such high GDP, not so safe, not so much security, the consequences of detaching from reality come very quickly on an individual level and on a, like if you're in a, you don't even need to go outside the nations. If you're in Southside Chicago and you want to act like reality doesn't exist, right? And you go, defund the police, incarceration doesn't work. Whatever the silly ideas are, right?
Let's let guys out on bail 46 times.
Yes, then the consequences come and they affect you, right? If you are living my family background's originally from Nigeria, right? So I have a unique perspective on a lot of things because I have this weird mixed background. British and Nigerian, grew up in Saudi Arabia, live again in the Middle East, in the UAE, spend a lot of time in the US. So I'm not just like purely Western centric. I kind of look at the world as a whole. I've traveled to so many places. And in most of the world, reality is very much real, right? It's in your face every single day. There are consequences to stupid actions and stupid decisions, and they affect you and you see it. And I just think people have been coddled for so long. Which is it's weird because it's a double-edged sword, right? You want people to be comfortable. You don't want there to be danger at the door. But when it's like that for someone's entire lifetime, or you look at like lots of the people who set the policies, right? Like they don't even live the life of the typical Canadian or the typical American or whatever. Some of these people, they've been in the world of politics for 40, 50 years. Yeah. They've never run a business. They don't even know basic economics, and they don't need to. Right. So they're so detached, and they're the ones making the decisions. They're just saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. And there's people on the ground who are bearing the consequences. All right. Look at this whole immigration thing that's going on now. Right. In parts of Europe. I mean, you've got countries in Europe that are increasing their population by 1% per year purely through immigration. Canada's probably pretty similar.
Yeah. Right. Population's growing, but not because of birth rates of Canadians, because of immigration.
Yeah. And very few people are like truly against immigration. This country has possibly the highest percentage of immigrants in the entire world.
Yeah. But I mean, that dynamic of immigration has shifted dramatically because my parents immigrated to Canada. Yeah. And I remember having this conversation with my dad a couple of weeks ago. I asked him, like when you guys came to Canada, like were there requirements? Was there a bar of entry that you had to meet? He said, absolutely. You got a certain number of points for bringing a certain amount of money to the country. If you had children, you got a certain number of points. If you spoke English or French, you got a certain number of points. If you had a certain degree or skill set, you had a certain number of points. So it was easy for him to get in because he was married with kids, had a house already in the UK, sold it, brought some money over, had an engineering degree, worked for the Royal Air Force in radio and communication. So it was an easy in for him. But today it's like people come to Canada, they just, declare that they're a refugee or they're running from death or something or another, and they're on government assistance into perpetuity almost. Yeah. I go to the Home Depot down the street from where I live, and there's a Palestinian lady sitting there with a brand new $2,000 iPhone that's fresh from Palestine. And I wouldn't be surprised if the rest of her family is out at different locations, and they're also collecting government assistance. They're not poor, no, you know what I mean, but they're not contributing to the fabric of society.
It's the same in the UK. It's the same in Germany. It's the same in many parts of the US, and it's.
And there's got to be standard. Like immigration is good, provided, like, immigration is very good in the UAE, obviously, right? Because they're literally sucking the talent and the brains of every Western country to here under pay almost nothing in taxes. We have a government that supports you and wants to endorse economic growth and prosperity. Follow the rules, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, there's a rule of law. Don't mess the place up. I mean, you drive around, there's no graffiti.
Nope.
You drive around anywhere in the U.S., it's filthy. There's graffiti everywhere.
Seen
there's
any homeless
debauchery.
people or bums or
No
druggies?
homeless people. There's no like rainbows painted on the sidewalk or any of these things. It was very orderly, right? And it facilitates an environment of work and prosperity and development. And this is a very interesting experiment, and you know, we're going to see how this unfolds here in Dubai over the next several decades. But it's already proven the West very, very wrong.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you know, I grew up in the Middle East, and I've always said, since I was young, I've always said I think this is the most misunderstood part of the world. I don't know about the whole Middle East, but certainly the Gulf countries, the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Kuwait. Because in the West, again, people forget every nation has its own propaganda, right? And people think Middle East, they just say, oh my gosh, terrorism, oppression, no one has any rights, you can't do anything, da-da-da. Like you get the whole laundry list. Every time I say anything positive on about Dubai on social media, I'm either accused of being paid by the government, which would be nice, but I'm not. Or, you know, being some type of shill or being, you know, what?
I'll be honest with you. I wonder sometimes with the amount of positive feedback I get from the guys that I've talked to. I'm like, hang on a second, you on payroll?
No,
you know what I mean?
People genuinely like the place.
Yeah, they genuinely like the place.
Yeah, people.
I think it's starting to become obvious to me.
Yeah, people genuinely like the place, and it's also fascinating because this region is not like, it has a lot of disadvantages.
Yeah,
compared to the West, right? Yes, sure, there is oil. Not in Dubai, by the way. Dubai's economy is less than 5% oil, but Abu Dhabi has oil.
Yeah.
But like, it's a desert. It's a desert. The climate, particularly in the summer, is, you know, can be pretty brutal. You don't have as much greenery and lakes, and like Canada, the USA, these are some of the most beautiful countries in the world. England is a very, very beautiful country. California, probably the most beautiful state in the USA. And these are all places where it's policy.
I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to move to California.
Yeah, everyone did.
Yeah, everyone wanted
California or New York.
California dreaming, right?
Yeah, and it's weird. I mean, there's something you said where you said that it's a shame, and I think that's true on a micro level and short term. Long term, I actually think that what's happening is good. I think it's good that countries and cities and regions are more and more having to compete for the best and the brightest people. So I view this as, you know, for most of the 20th century, let's say all of the 20th century, the West is the best. The West is the place to be. Everyone wants to move to the UK or USA or Canada or Australia or certain parts of Western Europe, and that's kind of it, right? No one's interested in a west to east migration. And I think that this century
shifted.
This is the century where it's all shifting.
Yeah.
So sure, there's still tons of people who want to move to the West and who will, but the migration is now flowing in all sorts of directions. You've got places coming up which 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody wanted to move there. I know Americans who over the last few years have moved to El Salvador, right? Yeah. El Salvador used to be just known for homicides and gangs and murders and horrible things. Now it's the safest country in the entire Western Hemisphere. They just released the homicide statistics from 2024. It's now safer than Canada.
Yeah, that's correct.
Just overtook Canada. Yeah. I've been to El Salvador twice now. People also think I'm on their payroll. And they you know, economically, it's got a long way to go. Yeah. But now that it's safe and secure, people can build now. I first came to Dubai actually when I was about 12. And it's fascinating. When I first came here, it was nothing like what you see now. 80% of what you see now hadn't even been built. And that's less than 30 years ago. And so it's just developing and growing and growing. And there's all this investment coming in. They're predicting the population. They're planning for it to double. I think it just hit 4 million last year. They're planning for about 8 million, I think, by 2040. And they have a vision. And they're just like, all right, like, this is our plan. This is what we're doing. There isn't this left-right ping-pong of going back and forth between parties and nothing getting done. There isn't like all this culture war crap that's distracting people and dividing them and separating them. Everyone's just kind of on the same page, regardless of where they've come from. And everyone just respects the core thing. I get asked by a lot of people about like specific laws here. Oh, can I hold my girlfriend's hands? What happens if I kiss my wife in public? Can I wear this? Can I do this? I always just tell people, look, just be normal and respectful. Be normal and respectful, which you probably already are in your country, and you will not have problems unless you're extremely, extremely unfortunate, right? Like, don't be a knucklehead. Don't like try to bring in cocaine or try to, have sex on the beach with you. Or like don't. When you hear these stories about someone got arrested in Dubai, 90% of the time, like they were doing something really, really.
They're asking for it.
Doing something really stupid. And look, you might think, hey, well, you shouldn't be arrested for that. That can be someone's view, right? Remember the Brittany Griner thing in Russia, right? Yeah. Someone might be like, hey, well, they might think weed should be legal everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's not. Okay. So if you're going to go to a country, which is most of them, where it's not, like, don't take it.
Yeah.
Like,
respect the laws.
Just respect the laws. And if you don't want to, then, you can stay in California. You don't have to come to Dubai. You don't have to go to China or Russia or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, people make their choices.
I find the incentives very interesting too, because if you compare, for me, I was telling you before, like I've got to figure out an exit strategy. Like I see the trajectory of Canada; it's on the decline. I pay a lot in taxes. I've already figured out that my tax rate would go down 7.26 times living here. Mm. And then if you look at the incentives, like in the United States, because I've always wanted to live in the U.S. when I was a kid. Like I said, California dream and wanted to move to California. California is right at the bottom of the list. Like I've been there many a times. It's a dump now. Tax rates are all. Weather's beautiful. It's got some nice coastline and some interesting things to do. But it's again just a horrible place. But if you look at the incentives in the U.S., okay, well, how can you enter the U.S.? You can do a Trump Golden Visa. Mm-hmm. You donate $1 million to the Trump government, and they take that from you, and you get a fast track. You can do an E2 visa, start up a business. That doesn't cost too much. It's just under $100,000. You got to follow some processes. But I mean, you're still living in a country where they let criminals out 46 times on bail for doing the dumbest things ever, and when they should be incarcerated, and they should prioritize the safety of the public. And you look at a place like this, and you put something like $550,000 into a piece of real estate. You now own a piece of real estate, so an appreciating asset. You're not donating it to the government. You're adding to the economy here. You spend 90 days here, and you're a tax resident.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I don't see that incentive in Canada. I don't see that incentive in the US. I don't see it in the UK. I don't see it anywhere in Europe.
They're doing the opposite.
A draw for people to even contemplate that. There's no real strong offers. And it's like, they actually get it here. They seem to understand that there's a way, like, you're going to attract, bees with honey.
Yes.
And if you're crap, you're going to attract flies.
Yeah. They think like business owners. They think like entrepreneurs here.
Yeah.
Like, as far as cities go, Dubai is kind of like a startup, essentially.
Almost,
and the thing is, it's so funny. Again, I'm going to be accused of being, on their payroll.
You're
but like
payroll, man.
the leadership here are smart. They have common sense. They get it, and they're actually very worldly. They're actually very world aware. So they're very aware of wokeness. They're very aware of bad immigration policies. They're very aware of this is an Islamic country. Mm. And they have no problem with extremists here because they don't tolerate it, right? Yeah. There are terrorist groups that are allowed to run riot in Western Europe, which have been banned here for a long time, right? They don't care where crime or degeneracy is coming from, like which demographic or whatever. They're just like, no. If you want to steal from people, if you want to rob, rape, murder, all that, you cannot do that here. And if you
enforce the law, which is different.
Yeah, they just enforce it. And another thing that they do, which is very wise. So you would think that most Westerners would think that if you had a nation where 85% of the population is foreign-born immigrants and only 15% is local citizens, then that is going to lead to massive clashes and discontentment. And it doesn't, for multiple reasons. Number one, you have rule of law. Number two, you're not just, you have an actual border policy, right? And you're not importing degenerate people from all over the earth. But third, and the one people often overlook, is actually that there's essentially no pathway to citizenship. It's virtually impossible for a non-Emirati to get a passport.
Yeah.
Very easy to become a resident. So if you want to be a resident, you want to bring your family, you want to invest in the nation, you want to buy property, you want to start a business, you want to work for a business, come on in. But and we're not going to tax you. We're not going to, you'll have a safe environment. It's going to be really good for your children and so on.
Is that angle to sort of like pull the rug out under if they ever need to be deported quickly? You're not a resident. You don't have a passport. You're out, sort of thing.
I don't know. I don't think it's for that. I just think it's to protect. So Emiratis are already. I'm sure that helps, but like Emiratis are already a very small minority in their own country. But they basically have done this judo where there's like a mutual respect and sort of symbiotic relationship between the citizens and the residents. So there isn't this like xenophobia or like anti-immigrant sentiment or whatever. Like if you talk to Emiratis, they're not like mad at, why are all these foreigners coming into our country or whatever, right? They know like, no, we want and need all these people. They've literally built the country, built the infrastructure, all the buildings you see and whatever, like that's all from foreign-born talent. All the investment coming in, whether it's from the West or the East, like it's mostly foreign. But they still have their sense of identity. And they're like, yeah, this is ultimately our country, right? If they just gave all these people passports, then you'll kind of get probably even faster version of kind of what's happening in the West, where all national identity is just lost, right? They want to remain a Islamic country, for example, and it's interesting even how that's handled here because there is that's a question I get asked a lot. Like as a Christian, a lot of people ask me, are there churches in Dubai? Are you free to worship? Will I get arrested if I wear my crucifix? Like and I'm like, no. Right? Like, well, yes, there are churches, and no, you won't be arrested for your crucifix. In fact, you can buy them in the souks and the malls openly. The only real rule is you can't try to convert the local population. You can go to church. You'll see, I don't know if you were here, see some of like lots of the Christmas decorations. Yeah, you'll hear, everywhere. Like there is true religious tolerance. In fact, because they don't have like absolute freedom of speech here like they do in the USA, and people can be critical of that and have their opinions. What it also actually means is Christianity is more protected here than it is in the West. You see what I mean? So here, you're not allowed to, you can't burn a Bible. You can't, go on like some crazy tirade and, attack against Jesus Christ or what, because like, they're like, no, we don't want, whether it's Islam, it's Judaism, it's Christianity, it's like it's not a net positive to our country and the people in it for everyone to be insulting and attacking each other's deeply held faiths and beliefs. You see what I mean? So just like, yes, Islam is protected here to, some extent, but like every religion is.
Yeah, I think the best illustration of that, I was just thinking about that, is I've never heard of a church being burned down in Dubai.
Not. Oh my gosh.
But you hear about churches being burned down in Christian countries all the time.
The consequences of burning a church in Dubai would be more severe than the consequences of burning one in anywhere in the West.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because, that's, it's a mockery of what's supposed to be the most advanced and appealing civilization in history.
Yeah.
And it's just not.
Yeah. It's such a strange time. I know people.
Gosh. It's like a big tough guy in the schoolyard allowing himself to get kicked in the nuts over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's still considered the big tough guy somehow.
Well, he's still got a lot of money and power and cultural influence.
Still, yeah.
And I think that's it. But like I said, the world is getting more competitive. And I think that's a good thing. I think, 20, 30 years ago, someone like yourself or someone like myself even being here right now, the probability would have been a lot lower. It'd be like, well, I'll just stay in the UK. I'll just stay in Canada, right? Like, why go look around? But I think now, this is another positive of the internet and social media, is people can get closer to reality. So instead of just getting your view of the UAE or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or whatever from whatever your TV and newspapers tell you, you can talk to people who are there. You can send messages. Oh, I know this guy in Dubai. Let me send him a message. Like, you know, what's it actually like? And then you've got the world so interconnected now with flights. Like you can get a direct flight from almost anywhere to here. So as long as you're willing to, you know, sit on a plane for, you know, maybe 16 to 18 hours if you're coming from, say, Canada, you can just find out for yourself, right? And instead of just hearing what people are saying, it's just like, just go wherever it is. Just go there and see for yourself what it's like. Not everything and everywhere is for everyone, but you know, I think this, like I said, I think long term this is good. I think it's good that people are leaving California and going to other places. I think it's good that, you know, this idea that nations can just do whatever they want and treat people however they want and have whatever crap policies and take as much money from people as they want.
Would shift sooner than later, wouldn't you? Though,
they have to feel the pain more.
Yeah, you're probably right. There's probably going to be a little bit more pain for the nations and for the leaders of the countries before they figure it out. But I think they're starting to see the problem arising because you start to hear some public announcements from the state around them noticing the wealth and the successful leaving their country because they're fed up with being mistreated.
Yeah.
You know?
But their response is still wrong. Their response is we need to tax them even harder.
Yeah, the response is tax them even harder, shove more, restrictions, down their throat. You know, I was watching a clip the other day about a summary of the Carney government, the new Liberal government that took over after Trudeau, and just about every piece of legislation that's either being evaluated, gone through royal assent, become law, depending on whatever stage it's in. It's not really to improve the betterment of the country and the civilians. It's to restrict movement, restrict speech, restrict monetary policy for those within the country. If you look at the data in the UK, they've had 12, I looked this up the other day, they've had 12,000 police arrests on their police records for infractions of social media posts.
Yeah.
For saying something online that somebody would interpret as hurting their feelings. And they either get fined, put in jail, fined and put in jail.
Is this UK or Canada?
UK. Canada just passed some legislation that's very similar to that. And the way they do it is they'll pass very broadly language legislation they can interpret later on down the law when it becomes law. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing in Canada. Like, it's a risky environment for me to be there and speak often the way that I do.
Yeah. I know people in the UK who have been investigated.
Yeah.
And I know one person who's been prosecuted for social media posts.
Yeah.
So it's very real. I know people hear these stories, but
it's 12,000 times that they've charged people now.
It's more than Russia.
Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you another, you were talking about like society's comforting lies.
Yeah.
I'll tell you another one, which is breaking. And we're kind of talking about this, which is that, that people in the West, the idea that like we're the only people who have freedom, and freedom is just like our exact specific definition of it. I think for most of people's lives, and people still believe this, that like, because when I talk about these things or I say certain things on social media, a lot of people have this. What I hear a lot is, well, there's nowhere else to go. All right, and when someone says that, to use your term, I'm like, yeah, you're still plugged in. Like if you think that there are only 5 to 10 countries in the entire world where you can, make a decent living, then the propaganda has hit you hard. You need to see more places. Is everywhere equally free? No, obviously not. Is everywhere equally prosperous? No, of course not. Is the West in general the best at certain things? Yeah, I would say so. But it's not on like every metric that it's the best. And hey, look, so much stuff comes down to who you are, what your priorities are, what your beliefs are, what you think laws and society and culture should look like or shouldn't look like. And I think that's also kind of hard for some people to get around. And I think this is a wider point even to what we were talking about earlier. So something I like a lot about your work, Rich, is I think that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I always get the idea that you want to give people information and truth and even harsh realities and then let them make their decisions, but to be informed.
Yeah, and I lately have been offering more in the way of prescriptions because I find that people can't even think for themselves anymore. So, I'll offer a 30,000 overview of a problem, and then I'll say, well, here's a potential solution to that problem now.
Okay.
Just go do it. But I think there's a lack of activity too. Like there's a lack of motivation to change something. And, it's like that meme where you see that like weird blob guy, with the stick, poking something. He's like, just do something. Right. And it's like they want me or you or guys maybe with an audience to go and solve the problem for them. But they're too afraid to speak up for themselves and voice an opinion. Or if they see something that's wrong, say, that's wrong. Let's change that. Let's not agree with that. Let's not support that. Let's not shut up and just look the other way. Let's talk about that, open and honestly, and point to the facts without being worried about hurting somebody's feeling. And I think that, unfortunately, in today's world, you have to be somewhat anti-fragile. You have to be able to improve if chaos comes at you in your world. And very few people are anti-fragile and can get better and stronger and improve as an individual or as a corporation or a movement when chaos hits them. Most of them sort of like cower away and they sort of, tucker into the shadows and the darkness and they just shut up, or they'll go into an online forum with an anonymous handle and avatar and, discuss those concepts over there. It's unfortunate because I think I can't count how many times people have said, well, you need to run for prime minister. You need to affect change in parliament. And I think you had a conversation with Max Bernier, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great guy. I've supported him for the last 2 Canadian elections. I've had him on my podcast twice to try to amplify his voice. And he's got a great message, and I think he's got the best platform in Canada. But in every election, his party never wins a single seat. So that just tells me the country is just not interested in supporting those policies and views. A more libertarian idea and mindset, a more a stronger notion of freedom, accountability, individuality. Nobody wants that anymore. And, it's unfortunate because I think that was a strong part of society. In the country that I grew up in, I think Canadians had an identity, when I was a kid. I certainly felt it, when I traveled to the States or if I went around when I was a teenager in my 20s, but I think it's been lost, completely. The UK's lost it. The British Empire is completely gone now. It's easily on the decline. The US has very strong influence and power. I mean, we just saw what they did in Venezuela, so that's, it's an incredible feat. But I think there's a big story behind that story where it's probably like a negotiated sort of transition rather than a very effective Delta Force that went in and distracted the president of the country, for the optics of television. But it's fascinating, dynamic as you look at all these things.
Yeah. Well, I think the sort of high accountability, high agency, sort of entrepreneurial type of mindset has always been a minority in the human population.
Well, their policies don't facilitate and encourage it.
No,
they don't encourage outside of the box thinking. They don't encourage, entrepreneurship. In fact, the Trudeau government in Canada was constantly attacking entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Oh, they're taking advantage of the system. They're not paying their fair share in taxes. Yeah. I mean, I've paid enough in taxes to pave multiple highways in Canada. So I'm really not sure what angle that was coming from, but it's like somebody had to be the boogeyman.
Yes.
And it always seems to be the successful and wealthy and those that have done the work, and they disincentivize you to do the work by taxing you with more work that you do and the more success and more value that you create. Yeah. So at some point, people are just going to be like, well, I'm just going to take my stuff and leave.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same. It's the same in the UK. It's the same in much of Europe. You're seeing it starting to spring up more and more in the USA.
Yeah. People are getting vocal about it, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was I going to say? I have a theory which touches on something that we've been talking about, which is this idea of agency and accountability.
Yeah.
I used to think that was something that, I don't know, like everyone just had or necessarily could work on. I've changed my framework for this, and I think it's given me a more accurate picture of the world, which is, how almost any human trait exists on a normal distribution?
Yeah.
I think agency is the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think agency exists on a normal distribution. So I think there are extremely low agency people and there are extremely high agency people, and most people cluster somewhere in the middle, right? So most entrepreneurs, people who start companies, people who go out and do strange, weird, exploratory, different things tend to be very much on the high agency, and they're willing to go against the grain. They're willing to speak their mind. They're willing to take accountability for their successes and their failures. They tend to point the finger inwards rather than outwards. They tend to be more individualistic and more opposed to various forms of collectivist thinking. But I think that's a minority of people are like that, and I think that's perhaps just as innate as height or IQ or whatever else may fall on a normal distribution. And I think that when you're organizing a society or a nation, there's this battle where you're trying to accommodate people all across this spectrum. Mm-hmm. And it's easiest to appeal to the middle and perhaps the lower end. That's like a big chunk of people. And I think that's why, you know, we probably wonder why like these socialist ideas or communist ideas, why won't these ideas just die, right? How many times have they been tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed? And they're like, no, we need more collectivism. We need to tax the rich. And it appeals to a large chunk of the population, I think, because of this agency thing, right? The high agency people are always going to be a minority, and you can demonize them, especially when you have these narratives around like billionaires are bad, or if someone makes money, it means they stole it from others, or they're just hoarding, or they're parasites on society, whatever it is.
Money's the root of all evil.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is the most misquoted Bible verse, because that's not what the Bible even says. People quote the Bible says the love of money is the root of all or many evils, depending on the translation. And the love of money is very different to just money.
Yeah, well, they said, what is it? Love people, not money. So not the other way around, obviously. I mean, there's some bad people with wealth, obviously, but
there's a lot of bad people without it.
Money is just like the accumulation of wealth. I think people don't understand this. People that don't have it anyway. Is just a representation of value. The more wealth that you've created for yourself, the more value you've typically created in the world. Elon Musk is a billionaire for a reason, one of the richest people in the world, because he's created a tremendous amount of value solving a lot of problems. Boring tunnels, electric cars, solar panels, rockets. He's doing things that NASA couldn't just figure out and bankrupted themselves on. But that's all that wealth is. And I think that when people understand that money is actually a good thing, and that it can be leveraged for good and do a lot of good, then the narrative can change. But I think the vast majority of the Western ideal is that it's like people hate the idea of it for some reason, which is so bizarre to me, because when I was a kid, it was just like, yeah, let's go out there and make a name for ourselves. Let's become successful. Let's become influential. Let's go and do something. And I don't see that with today's youth. I don't see young men especially looking to accomplish something. Instead, it's like, go along to get along. We'll figure it out. I'll just be myself. That's what they said. There's a total lack of drive and real ambition and sense of contribution. And that's why you get all these soft guys today. You get so many soft plugged-in beta males, and you get a lot of strong women out there that are filling the void. And that's why we have that division.
Yeah. Well, man, there's a lot to say on this topic. I mean, one of them is obviously more men and women than ever before are growing up in or have grown up in some form of broken family.
43%.
Yeah, that's in the U.S.
That's the number in North America, generally speaking, broadly across the board. And that number represents the vast majority of the incarcerated, the vast majority of teenage pregnancies. It's a contribution towards gang activity, poor grades in school, awful outcomes, into adulthood, depression, teenage pregnancies, abortions, all of these things, come primarily from not toxic masculinity, but from a total absence of masculinity. And even the fathers that are around in the household, a lot of them are like furniture. They just don't get that involved. They let the wife lead the family. They don't know how to put their foot down, or they're not allowed to lead. Depending on what the situation has to be. So there's also the dynamic of the families that still stay together, raised by two parents, where the father isn't that masculine and isn't able to to develop that son and that daughter into something that is a contributor to society, like a net positive.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, there's that. Of course, you have the endless money printing, and then with the social and cultural factors we talked about before, if you think tradition, for most of human history, the incentives and reasons for why a young man should work hard and build himself up and so on it was obvious, right? It's because you want to get married and you want to have a family and have kids and be able to provide for them and be respected and have some degree of, status and power and all of that good stuff, even if it's on a small scale. And
those incentives have gone away, though.
Yeah, they've eroded. Yeah. They're still there. But I think fewer and fewer people are feeling, rightly or wrongly, that it's a realistic and achievable goal. The juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening for both sexes in slightly different ways, right? You have a lot of women who think now that, why would I get married? Why should I have children? I don't need to be a mother, and so there's this like multi-pronged attack that's going on, which is kind of targeting different people in different ways. And everyone feels it to some degree, even if you are someone who has a much more traditionalist worldview and ideals and wants to do and accomplish these things, it is objectively harder in some aspects to do it now, right? So even if you're a young man who wants to, you want to get married and you want to have lots of kids and you want to be able to raise them, and you want to be able to do that and say, be the absolute breadwinner for your family, you can still do it and achieve it, but it is objectively harder than it was before, right? If you were to go back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, the ability for one person, typically the father, to be able to provide to that degree and for everyone to be comfortable, and for that unit to be and remain stable, it was, well, maybe not the stability part, because I know divorce is, kind of shot up around that time as well, but it was more realistic. And it was more achievable for a greater percentage of men. And I think a lot of young guys see that now and they're like, gosh, man, unless I'm in like the top 1, 5, 10%, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to kind of compete in all these things. So I think a lot of people just kind of check out.
Yeah, well, I mean, my granddad could have been half the man that I am and gotten twice the woman back then versus what you get today as a guy. Like as a guy, you got to be twice the man and you really get half the woman.
Do you think that's true the other way around as well? Or do you think it's one way?
For women? I mean, to a certain extent, to a certain degree, a lot of women are forced to settle for less than their first choice because the pool, there's lots of complaints about it online and there's some degree of truth to it. The pool of marriageable men, of successful men, of financially stable men is much smaller. And even if they are financially stable and even if they are a pool of competent men, they're generally not the kind of masculine men that women want to be with on a long-term basis. Women don't often get their first choice anymore. One of the things that I've noticed that I think contributes a lot to the divorce rates, because I pay a lot of attention to clips and things that people send me, and I'll look at them and listen to these women talk about their divorce and why they untied the knot and what they were doing before, and even complaints from guys, is that there's no accountability on, women aren't held to certain standards anymore, and neither are men, to some degree either. Like they're not encouraged to make something out of themselves. Like women's value is inherently highest when, like, women are born with value, as they say, and men's value is often created. So men aren't creating value that much anymore, and those that do are finding themselves in an environment where, it's been said the end state of hypergamy is polygyny now. And that's where things are leading because all the women want a certain type of guy and they tend to be like right at the very top shelf. And they find themselves in situations, whether they know it or they don't know it or they're aware, it's declared, it's covert, it's overt, but they find themselves in situations at some point where they're sharing the same men. And that's an interesting dynamic, and I don't see that shifting. I see more and more of that happening than monogamous type of relationships, and I think that men are behind that notion.
Do you think it's happening? You see that happening more?
Oh yeah.
As in just sheer numbers more than.
Yeah, but I mean, they're like.
Okay.
I mean, even if you look at the numbers on the dating apps, the vast majority of women on the data that they collect find most men unattractive.
Yeah.
You know, they're mostly swiping left on the vast majority of the options that are presented to them. And then the vast majority of men will swipe right on just about anything that is presented to them, provided it's, you know, optically pleasing to them, which is almost everything that they see now. But the match rate is very, very low. So when the match rate happens, it's like women are matching with, you know, the Chads and, you know, those types of avatars of the world that are really spoiled for choice. And then they get mad when these guys don't commit to them. You know, I was talking to, you know, a couple of guys about this earlier this year, and it's like, you know, he said, it was Taraban actually. He said, you know, women would be wise to learn to relax their standards and the requirements of men. And, you know, men would be wise to essentially focus on improving their looks and their value. Because the shift from monogamy to polygyny is certainly happening. Whether it's accepted publicly or not doesn't matter. It's happening.
Yeah.
You know, it's still disparaged. You know, women will tell you, well, you're not a real man if you don't do this, right? So publicly, like, men are still called out. You know, we saw what happened with what was that guy, Andy, from that Coldplay concert with the Coldplay kiss cam?
Yeah.
You know, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, we're still in an environment where, I mean, people are doing that anyway.
Yeah.
But like, we're still in an environment where that's, you know, disparaged. But he was the one that paid the greatest toll for that, not her.
Yes.
She didn't even lose her job.
And
She went to work the next
they were
day.
both married, right?
Yeah, and
didn't they do a whole like fluff piece on her?
Yeah.
Like a glamour shoot. And
Yeah.
I didn't read the article, but
yeah, I didn't read it either. But I mean, somebody did like one of these memes. It's like a picture of her with her dog, and it's like, you know, her Tinder profile, and then the picture of her with the, you know, shock in her face when the camera got her, and it's like, you know, her in real life sort of thing. So like the internet got their hands on that, but I mean, like the fluff piece was, you know, essentially, you know, she's this angelic thing that really didn't do that much wrong, and she was already untying the knot, and you know, it assassinated her character. But nobody did anything to talk about the CEO who lost his job, who lost his position, who pretty much lost everything. Again, you know, men are the disposable sex and women are the protected sex, and that's just the way things are trending today.
This is a good example of the one foot in each camp.
Correct.
That I sort of see in the West. So again, even when it comes to what people deem right or wrong, or moral or immoral, a lot of it comes from Christian teachings and ethics. Even people who are not Christians, so some of them are even very vocal atheists, or might even claim to be sort of anti-Christianity and so on. But actually, their sort of rubric for ethics and morals is largely based on they cherry pick out the parts they don't like, but it's kind of largely based on, you know, Jesus's teachings and ideas of compassion and forgiveness and so on. But then again, they're playing the sort of weird
it's that
game
suicidal
where
empathy now. Like the thing that drives me wild is when you see somebody like an OnlyFans creator like Lily Phillips or you know, whoever it is that a Christian church will baptize. After, you know, a spree of 100 men or 1,000 men in one day or whatever it is, like,
and then the following day she goes right back to it.
Yeah, like they're like, come on, guys, like, you know, there has to be some rule of law, like there has to be some accountability, like you have to deny somebody that fresh start. But I get it, you know, like that's where we are today. You know, it's like 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future. Do you follow the Old Testament or do you follow the New Book?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah. I mean, a Christian is
but I mean, they're different narratives too, though, right?
They
like
are.
The new
I mean,
version is more forgiving. This is why we have churches with rainbows and trans priests in them now.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, again, this is cherry picking, right? So I'm not going to. I'm not the perfect Christian or the best sort of theologian or apologist out there. But in order to properly understand the New Testament, you need to understand the Old Testament to some degree. If someone is just reading, all right, I'm just going to read the Gospel of Mark and a couple, you know, I'm going to highlight some nice quotes from Jesus here, and I'm going to just ignore the other 98% of the book, then you're not going to get the full picture. Similarly, I mean, if someone only follows the Old Testament, then, I mean, that they'd essentially be closer to Judaism, right, than Christianity, because the entire gospel is in the New Testament.
I was talking to a Muslim guy last night that said the Old Testament's very closely aligned with Islam.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, all three are Abrahamic faiths.
Yeah.
Right, and Muslims are encouraged to read the Bible, as far as I understand in Islam. So, you know, I think, look, with all human beings, there's always going to be a tendency to everyone cherry picks to fit their narrative and their worldview to some degree, right? Not religious people are prone to this. Non-religious people are prone to this. People on the right, people on the left, whatever. Like everyone does it, right? We all have a narrative and a lens through which we view the world and which we think is correct or close to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't hold it. And so we naturally, every time we see something that confirms it, it stands out to us, and we sort of highlight it. And when something goes against it, we dismiss it or ridicule it or so on. And so, yeah, I think that happens a lot. Like, I'll be honest with you, I have more, I have much more sort of grievances with so-called progressive Christianity than I do with like the most dogmatic atheist types, because I think it's not, the faith is not meant to be diluted, right? So once you start, well, okay, I'm saying you're a Christian, but yeah, this bit makes me feel a bit icky or uncomfortable. I'm going to take this out or take this. I'm going to twist that one, that one.
Why do we stop that? If something makes you feel uncomfortable, lean into it, man. Like, there's a reason for that, I think.
Yeah. And again, I think that's because people have their, in Christianity, there's this idea of, there's the faith and there's the world of believers and there's the world. There's the secular world, right? And you are supposed to be in the world, but not of it. And, it's kind of interesting. Like I said, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and my whole family's Christian. I was raised going to church and everything like that. And when I was a kid, and this sort of speaks a lot about society and culture, I remember, obviously I grew up around people of all faiths and all backgrounds and nationalities. And I remember as a kid thinking, I got the easy religion. Because, every year I'd see the Muslims, fasting during Ramadan, all, for 30 days, an entire month, fasting, only able to eat after sundown. And in Saudi, like, the sun comes up pretty early and goes down pretty late and is very, very hot and dry. And, they can't drink water either. And I was like, gosh, like, I'm glad, I don't have to do that, to follow my religion or so on. And I had for a long time this idea, because Christianity's big on forgiveness and grace, but that's supposed to be after actual repentance. People forget the repentance part, right? And as time has gone on and I've gotten older and I've matured, I've realized actually following Christianity properly to the T is actually incredibly difficult, right? And most people, the sort of, what would I put it? The expectations of Christians have actually been very severely watered down and diluted. And I think this is why both people within the faith and outside of it, again, especially in the West, have like this weird idea of what it even is supposed to be. So when you're having unrepentant porn stars being baptized, and then you're even getting Christians like, oh yes, this is, like, I'm like, guys, can we?
It almost seems a mockery of the faith.
This is exactly what I mean,
yeah.
right? This is a mockery. If you're putting up a rainbow flag in a church, or you're having a gay bishop or a lesbian married priest who's married, a woman shouldn't be a priest to begin with, let alone a lesbian, let alone a woman who's married to another woman. Like, that should not be someone who's in a position of power in any type of church. And so it's all been sort of diluted and watered down to the point where, I mean, it's interesting. I think in the USA still something like 65% of the population identifies as Christian.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
But I'm like, okay, let's look at the laws and the culture and the general societal, like,
they're not followed.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And all of this to me is a massive problem. Yeah. Actually, I would prefer, someone might not like me saying this, I would rather those people don't even claim to be Christian and just say, look, I'm just a secular humanist or whatever. Maybe I like some Christian ideas, but I don't really truly believe in it. Or what. I'd prefer that separation kind of actually clearly happens rather than people sort of claiming the faith and then running directly in opposition to it in many, many ways, so that they can appeal more to the world and kind of just blow with the wind. I really don't like that. And gosh, I don't even know what the point I'm making here, but it's frustrating. Like, I think with I think with Christians, like we need to start, and I can't speak for billions of people, right? There are so many Christians in different branches and so on, but
I'll say that, man, there's got to be a return to standards.
yes, it has to. I think
There has to be accountability.
It has to start within the Christian world itself.
Yeah.
Right. So before
You would get away with the stuff that the Christian religion is mocked for in like an Islamic type of religion. They just wouldn't put up with it.
No. So if there's like a reform, like the reform has to happen within churches.
Yeah.
First, there are churches that have no business even calling themselves churches.
I agree.
And it's confusing people.
Yeah.
Right. If you are looking at a church and they have rainbow flags and trans flags and BLM and the preacher is a lesbian, how's that Christy? Right. Like that's not Christian.
Yeah.
And someone, an atheist might look at that and go, be confused. A Christian might look at that and be confused. A Muslim looks at that and they're confused. Because then, what is the fruit that's coming out of that, right?
Yeah. Well, like one of the places they could start is like the final form for female promiscuity always seems to be Christianity now.
Yeah.
Right. We saw that with the Lily Phillips and all the other ones that are sort of like following down this route, even former porn stars. It's just not a good look on something that is, whose origin was the family formation, the raising of children,
Yes.
And all the other sort of supporting narratives around it. I think that, it's a real problem, the fabric of most societies, the foundation of the UAE seems to be Islam.
Yes.
Right. Rule of law, the 8 principles, see the 8 principles in the mall as you walk through them sort of thing. And it's a very well laid out sort of thing. It's understood. But you don't have those same standards elsewhere in the world, and they've moved away from it. They say they haven't, but they've certainly moved away from it. And when you have somebody, like an OnlyFans creator who makes more in 1 year than the entire NBA payroll,
Yes.
that's just a big sign of what's going on with society.
Yeah. And with both sexes, because who's paying for that?
Simps.
Right. This is men who are. So as much as I'm bothered by
a lot of them are actually Christian men too, is what you'll discover as well.
Yeah,
married Christian men.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me at all. And it's a massive shame. Like I don't know where to. I don't know where to begin to untangle this mess. Like I'm a podcaster. I'm a social media guy. I'm a musician. Right. Like I have these conversations.
We talk about it.
I talk about it. I think with me, and maybe you do this in your work with a different way, is it really comes down to, look, I don't know how to fix society or a country as a whole. I don't know how to fix Canada or fix the UK or whatever.
Fix the man
but
first.
I can help individuals.
Yeah.
I can help individuals. So if someone is willing and open, whether it could be fitness, it could be business, it could be faith, it could be any aspect of life. It could be, relationships, dating, marriage, having kids, marriage and having kids. Like I'm new to that one. I'm very, very early on in my journey. So I am very humble and hesitant to sort of give anyone direct advice on that front. But if a young man is asking me about, how to be attractive to women or how to manage himself in a relationship to some extent, or certain things he should look out for, red flags, green flags in a woman, that type of thing. I'm happy to help with that to some degree, based on what I know and what I've seen with other people. I think, I've got a decent enough data set to see generally what works and generally what doesn't. But it's a mess. And something that really strikes me when I do read the Bible, especially actually the Old Testament, is it's been a mess for thousands of years. Yeah. So many of these things are not new. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. Like during the time of the Old Testament and also in the New Testament, because this is a question the Pharisees asked Jesus about, is at that time there was a debate about fault versus no fault divorce. Mm-hmm. So that debate itself, as specific as that may seem to the modern times.
Was there a timestamp for that?
Oh gosh. Well, when Jesus is asked about it, that would be, I guess, around 30 AD.
Okay.
But the debate has been happening in the Jewish community prior to that. Okay. So there was a school in Jewish thought. There was a group of teachers, rabbis, who believed that divorce was valid for any reason, and a certificate of divorce can be issued without, she burned the dinner. Doesn't matter, right? It could be for whatever. But then there was the other school where it was like, no, only for adultery, or perhaps apostasy. Right, like those sexual immorality. like that's valid grounds for a divorce. And this is something they asked Jesus about because they were trying to trap him between. They knew whatever he replied. They asked Jesus, I actually, funnily enough, this was today's reading. I did Mark 10, so I know it's Mark chapter 10. They directly ask him, the Pharisees ask him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And they know that, like, whatever he says, he's gonna tick off one side or the other, right? If he says no, it's not, then the guys who support the essentially no fault divorce are going to be bad, and vice versa. So some of these things that we think are new problems or just degeneracy, immorality of all sorts, people have been trying to sort this out for thousands and thousands of years. So I think now we're dealing with like the modern version of it, which we are familiar with and which we're used to and which is amplified but with social media and smartphones and dating apps and all of these things that our dads or grandfathers didn't have to deal with. But a lot of the stuff is it's just recurrent. It's just recurrent. Men have been men, women have been women in all different societies, cultures, nations, faiths. They've been trying to work out what actually works. So even with the idea of tradition is generally like something that a group of people in a place have worked out is generally a net positive at a population level for people to do this thing in this way at this time, right? Yeah. So whether you're talking like Chinese society, Japanese, African tribes, people in the West, they've established certain things. And what I always find interesting is when they all came to the similar conclusions, right? Like when there's something that exists in all of these different places, which were disparate and not connected with each other in the way they are now for a very long period of time. And yet they all kind of reached similar conclusions on certain things.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with all the theories, though, is that there has to be some real actionable advice given to guys on how to navigate all that. Like it's always interesting to hear, okay, well, this led to that and that led to this sort of thing. And the conversations are up in there about this and this is undecided. But I think that in light of all that and, with the reality of all that existing, it presents a complex set of problems because men want women. Mm-hmm. Women want value that men create. And to some degree, at some point, they usually want families, and children. That's why men are here, scatter seed, women here to have babies sort of thing. And it's like the unfortunate issue with all of that is that men are forced to sort of make decisions and live in a way that isn't completely congruent with religion and culture that has existed for a long time. Like my angle is, people often ask me, Rich, would you ever get married again? Mm-hmm. No. Why would I want to expose my wealth to control of where I live right now?
Yes.
Why would I want to expose control of my wealth and determination of access to my children, assets, like anything that I create to the state, which is also being controlled by her because everything in family law is in her favor.
Yes.
And that forces men,
again, because they have one foot in that old mindset,
under my guidance, to never live in a way that looks like marriage. So I never say don't get married. I never say don't have kids. Mm-hmm. My angle is never live in a way that lets the government decide what happens to your wealth or access to your children.
Yeah.
And that forces men to set certain boundaries that women typically don't like not getting married, or maybe living in a way that doesn't look like marriage to the government, but still having children with them. And there's some.
Let me ask a question here because this is interesting because. I thought we're actually going to get into this earlier, but obviously we talked a lot about society and culture. But this is a really interesting area because this is a point where it's weird. I actually largely agree with you in one perspective, mm-hmm. and in another, I certainly have some pushback and disagreements. Mm-hmm. So if I put myself in your shoes, I would not get married because it doesn't really make sense. So if I were, and I've said this to people, so I have some, Christian friends who don't like me saying this, right? Or mm-hmm. conservatives who don't like me saying this because it to me, it's actually quite nuanced because certainly now in the West, even when people use the term marriage or talk about getting married, it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. if you're talking about marriage with someone who is like got a very traditional and religious based mindset, and they view marriage as what is the supposed to be God bringing two people together, leaving and cleaving. It's divorce is not supposed to exist, and if it does, it's like a very grave sin. And it's viewed through the traditional religious lens, then that's actually very different to the pure legal definition, right? The pure legal definition, in the West, you and I could freaking get married, right? Like, right? Yeah. So it once you're even allowing stuff like that,
you can't contract out of the legal system. So even if you do it in the eyes of God, like even if you do it before the church, but you don't do it before the government, if you're living in a way that looks like marriage to the government,
you're exposing
because
yourself.
Women always reserve the right to change their mind at any given time down the road,
yes,
you could potentially expose yourself to a situation or environment where you don't get to see your kids.
Yes.
Where half of your stuff that you've earned that maybe you try to protect with a prenup just, becomes a real headache for you. And I think guys can unfortunately avoid all of that. Because I mean, like the original agreement, the original contract was a virgin that was agreeable in your frame and wanted to bear your children and say things like, I baked you cookies today.
Yeah.
But now you get a gal that's in her 30s that said, look, I got a degree in bugs. I've got 4 abortions. Take me out to eat. I deserve, to be wined and dined sort of thing. And I think the social contract between men and women and the notion of marriage has been changed.
Heavily eroded.
Exactly.
Heavily.
The incentive doesn't exist anymore. And that forces creative solutions to that problem. And you're seeing some guys talk about it very publicly. The Tate brothers talk about it.
They do.
You see a lot of people that like find ways to sort of like live the life that they want on their terms. But the only way that you can do that now, unfortunately, as a guy, got to be on the top shelf, got to be handsome, got to be valuable.
See, yeah, like I totally get where your perspective comes from. So if I were an atheist and I didn't want children, I think there is a near 0% chance I'd even consider marriage. I think that if you're
in my experience, though, most guys want children. They want
sure. Most guys do, right?
They want something that closely approximates marriage.
So I'm saying, so if someone is not of any particular faith and they want children, then I think it's depending on where you live and depending on your relationship and who you're with and all of your value, like to me, that's where marriage might make sense. It might make sense. It might not. And again, now we're just talking from a purely like legal standpoint because the religious aspect is out for someone like that. I think if you are a person of faith, because look, if you're, let's boil it down to the basics. If you're a Christian, or even if you're Jewish, or even if you're Muslim, having sex outside of marriage, fornication is a sin, right? So if you want to have sex in a illicit way, you at least need to be married under God. If you want to do that separate to
that's why they got married back in the day. That's why our grandparents got married because they were 2 horny teenagers and wanted to have sex.
Absolutely.
Now today, when people get married, they're supposed to stop having sex with other people,
and most people do. So I think it's like, to me, there's a bit of a sliding scale. But I think before even having those conversations, what I always do with people is I actually ask to define terms. So when someone says marriage, I'm like, all right, are you talking about the legal? Are you talking about just like legal contractual marriage, or are you talking about covenantal marriage? Because even a lot of my fellow Christians and conservatives, they do the flip-flop thing, right? So when it's convenient, they're talking about the covenant, and then when it's convenient, they're talking about the contract. And I'm like, wait, which one are we doing? Because people are missing each other in these conversations. So when you're having guys in this sort of red pill space, or someone like saying, hey, I don't think it's smart for someone to get. I don't think it's smart for guys to get married. Smart men don't get married, as you might say yourself, right? Someone's like, oh my gosh, like that means you're anti-monogamy and anti-family, anti all of these things, right? I know, but they in their brains they can't or won't separate the ideas, and I don't think this is
where the unplugging comes from. Is you have to separate those two ideas.
Yeah, and I don't think that you
can love a woman, you can have children,
yes,
and not live in a way that looks like marriage to the government that would put your assets and the access to your kids at risk. That's the thing that guys have to understand.
Yeah, I get it. The thing is, and yourself, is that regardless, most people, for whatever reason, still want to get married, and most people still will. And it's interesting. See, I have this thing where like I agree with so much stuff that I hear from yourself and people who have held that perspective. And I agree so much, especially from the idealism side and the moral side of what people might call the tradcon camp, right? And I think that the truth is largely in the middle. So I think a lot of people in the tradcon side,
Yeah, I agree with you.
they don't, they tend to focus on how things should be or how they ought to be rather than how they are, right?
That's what I focus on. This is how things are.
Yes. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. So if I'm talking to a young man, I think they should, I'm like, if I'm, say, a young Christian man, let me be more specific. All right. If someone is secular, or they don't have any religious beliefs or whatever, then, you know, it's more of a, if they don't think sex outside of marriage is a sin, if they don't think that marriage is necessarily a covenant, they view it purely as a contract, then from a purely rational, logical perspective, I'm like, yeah, bro, you probably shouldn't get married, actually. Like, it doesn't make sense, especially if you're successful and have a lot of assets. It doesn't really make sense. Or if you're going to do it, like, 1,000,000% get a prenup. By the way, I think everyone should get a prenup. I'm very pro prenup. I had a very interesting conversation. Do you know Lila Rose? Probably, maybe.
Lila Rose, yeah.
Catholic podcaster,
the Tradcon
like,
girl.
yeah.
Sure.
So we actually ended up having like a whole conversation on her podcast just about prenuptial agreements.
Okay.
Which was really interesting.
And she thought they were a bad idea, I'm going to assume.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I actually have changed my mind on. I actually used to be against the idea of prenuptial agreements, and then actually when I learned more about them,
Why did you change your mind?
Facts.
Okay.
Facts. Because I didn't really know what they were. I had the sort of cartoonish view of a prenup, and I had that idea of just like, oh, well, if someone gets a prenup, it means they don't, trust their spouse or they're planning.
That's the tradcon view is typically, oh, well, that's just going to set you up for failure.
Yeah. See, I disagree with
But
that.
a prenup's the same reason why you put a seatbelt on when you get in a car and why a car has airbags.
I agree. I'm very, very
It's
pro
for a
prenup.
worst case scenario.
I'm very pro prenup now.
Yeah.
I'm very pro prenup because I agree with you 100% that in many parts of the West, many parts of the world.
And it's also, by the way, a very good test of how serious she is about you.
I agree. And I'll tell you what else I think is I think that if you are, most guys, even if they may logically actually agree with my perspective on this particular thing, they're afraid to have the conversation. And I think that if you are afraid or unable to at least have that conversation with your wife to be or potential wife to be, I actually would say that's a red flag. I'm not saying it's not easy. It might be emotional. Like it might test your ability to communicate and to work through certain things. But I think at a minimum, like I think everyone should have that conversation. If people are courting or dating and they're serious about, okay, maybe one day we're going to get married and or have kids, I think at a minimum, even if they have the whole conversation and then both parties are like, you know what, we don't need to do that. To me, that is infinitely better than like dodging it and just like hoping and
for the best. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Hope
don't
is
think
a terrible plan.
Yeah. So to me, like, I think there's a lot of truth here. I don't think it's like this or this. And like this one's absolute and this one is absolute. So when I hear guys or even gals doing the like, absolutely don't get married under, if someone was like, no one should get married, don't get married under any circumstances. To me, that's just going to lead to more societal destruction and it's bad for kids. It's bad for stability. It's bad. It's not good overall. And also, I don't think it's good for people's souls. But also this idea that, oh, everyone should just get married and there should, be no prenuptial agreements and you shouldn't even have those conversations. Shouldn't even cross your mind, right? That's I'm like, no, I think you're also living in La La Land. Like I didn't make the statistics what they are. Especially speaking to my American friends here, right? Like I'm from Nigeria. Nigeria, in Nigeria, actually marriages are very solid, right? In many parts of the world, marriages are very solid. Like they don't have to worry about all this stuff. But if you are coming from the British, American, Canadian perspective, anywhere where you've got a 30, 40, 50, 60% divorce rate, I get it's not a fun, comfortable conversation, but I think it should be had. I think it should be had. And if people don't want to, because I'll tell you one last point, because one thing that does bother me with some of the people with more traditional conservative views, which I largely share, sometimes I'm very much in line with, I don't see any of them advocating to fix the law.
family law itself.
No, they don't. No, they want to
I
fix
agree.
other laws, but they don't want. They for whatever reason they're very skittish about this one. And I'm like, well, as long as that is the case, if you are going to be encouraging and pushing people towards marriage in the legal sense, then in my view, I'd say it's actually quite negligent to not encourage them to, at a minimum, discuss prenuptial agreements and also to give more guidance. I want to see, I'd love to see more actual guidance and true information on people. How do you pick a good spouse and a good mother for your kids?
That's a great
Not
question.
just telling people, get
some answers
married,
on
get
that
married,
too.
just get married, bro. Just get married, bro. It's like, that's not good advice. Like, sure, I think marriage is a great, wonderful thing. I aspired for my marriage to end in death. I'm glad that my parents' marriage will end in death. I want all of my siblings' marriages to end in death, right? It's one of the only things I want to end in death. But that doesn't mean you just like close your eyes, like stick your fingers in your act like this fallen world does not exist and that people are perfect.
Here's the other problem with marriage, though. It's that, yes, okay, so, just over 50% of them end in divorce. So, yes, a prenup's a good idea if you're going to do something like getting married. But I still think that smart men shouldn't get married today in a Western environment. The other statistic that's often not considered by a lot of people.
Can I just push back one thing? It's not over. Where'd you get the over 50% from?
It's like 50, 51, 52% or something like that.
But that's like if you take all marriages, including people who are married like second, third, fourth.
No, it's
fifth
higher
times.
after the second time round. Like if you look at the divorce stats in North America, I believe it's like 51 or 52%. And that's quoted by James Sexton. So he's the divorce lawyer, pulling
I've never seen it as high as that.
So I'm assuming it's that, or let's just say that it's approximating that number, for argument's sake,
I know,
so that we
okay.
can disagree on that.
I think it's like for a first marriage, I think it's 30 to 40% in the USA, which by the way is still terrible.
I mean, that's still a terrible number,
It's still terrible.
but it's so that's an interesting, dynamic as well too, because there was a study done, the Teachman study, and women with more sexual partners have a much higher probability of unhappiness and divorce.
Yep.
I think it's like 83%
Goes
after
way
like
up.
12 partners.
Goes way up.
And if they're virgins at marriage, it's like less than 30%, right? Now, the other statistic that a lot of people don't talk about is, like most people get married for what? To be in a state of bliss, would you say, let's love each other?
I think that's actually part of the problem, that's the expectation.
That is the expectation that both sides want the other person to be a lot more than what they're capable of.
Ideally, but I don't think that's realistic, and I think that's
Correct. But
sets
I mean,
a
like,
lot of people up for failure.
that seems to be the expectation, probably more so from men than women. I think men
Probably.
are more romantic than women. I think
I
women
agree.
are more practical. But when they studied that data as well, I think the average time length in the long-term committed relationship was like 8.5 years.
Yeah.
Take a guess what percentage of people said that they were still in love after 8.5 years?
Still in love?
Both parties.
Or in bliss?
Both parties still in love.
Still in love. I'd say between 10 and 20%.
It was 12%. And then in a state of bliss, what would you say that percentage was?
3 to 5.
Less than 3%.
Okay.
Right. So very close. I mean, you're not too far off the mark. That's the other problem too, is that a lot of the times, you put yourself in an environment, both men and women, where they go and commit and maybe they have children and they don't even like each other. Yeah. And then they're stuck in an environment where they don't even like each other. But back to the point that, you brought up earlier about like sort of vetting the other person, like red flags and green flags. I'm glad you brought that up. Because I have a chapter in my first book on 21 red flags that men should consider before they invite a woman in their life. There's also some green flags. I put 16 together that seem to be the most common, like bright traits that you look for. Like one of them, would be very, very straightforward and simple would be the bright triad traits. Obviously, there would be things like, looking for women that, watch how they behave if you get sick. Do they abandon you? Do they become distant? Do they become cold? Do they look for ways to help you to improve your health? Do they look for ways to infuse themselves into your family, be useful, connect, form a connection with family and friends? These would be some green flags. So I think that, yes, I mean, look, if you're going to do something like get married, which is, not a very successful system for living together, and then those that stay married, most of them don't seem to be that happy with it, you should probably spend some time researching your prospective, husband or wife. I'm not going to use the word partner because that's ridiculous. We covered that earlier.
Please
but,
don't. I'll correct you if you do.
Yes, prospecting your future husband or wife. Like I think that guys spend more time trying to figure out what the fuel economy of the next car is, what the trunk space is, what the 0 to 60 time is, versus who is she, what does her past look like? Because she's very interested in a man's future, right? A man should be very interested in vetting a woman based on her past. But when you have those conversations, that becomes very difficult. People get uncomfortable. There's people watching this right now that are getting very uncomfortable with me saying this. But it's facts. It's 100% facts. If you're going to deal with a woman, if you're going to invite her into your life, yes, you need to be very, very careful about who you invite into your life, why you're inviting her into your life, and being very selective with it. Men need to follow more of a protocol of like, casting a wide net and fishing, and then choosing women that choose them. And then they can sort of whittle down the options from then. I think that women are in a far better position, and they should follow more of a strategy of hunting, where they go and look for the target. They target the right guy. They find ways to embed herself into his life where she would become irreplaceable, so that he would want to commit to her.
Yeah. My wife took your advice.
Good. She's a smart woman. And I think that one of the most interesting examples of this, which has become very public on social media in the last month, was the post that Brian Johnson did. Hey guys, I have a girlfriend. And if you read that from my perspective, or as I saw it, I saw a very predictable and clear pattern that Kate used to target Brian Johnson. Not in a nefarious way.
No.
But it seemed very, very clear to me that, she found ways to connect with this guy. She saw the value in this guy. She found ways to be useful in his life. She found ways to add value to his life. And I think that, one of the outcomes of that, if you look at his path, he's living longer. The data looks very good. He's doing very well. He's getting a lot more social media exposure. There's a degree of her contributing to that success. They often say, women don't stand behind, or behind every successful man is a woman. Well, women don't stand behind unsuccessful men. Yeah. Let's be very clear about that. So a lot of those contributions, a lot of that success, a lot of that achievement that he's accomplished, the Netflix deal, all this sort of stuff, his protocols are largely in part to her being involved with it. But where he's going wrong now, and I start to see, it's like, the follow-up tweet to that was something along the lines of, guys, I really miss Kate. And then he starts simping for her. And it's like, but if you put her up on a pedestal, if you treat her like a celebrity, she will eventually treat you like a fan. Yeah. And that's where guys go wrong. They don't understand the notion of maintaining frame in that long-term relationship. I always tell guys, it's way, way harder to maintain a high level of attraction with a woman over a long-term basis than just to date casually. Yeah, it's much easier to date casually than it is to maintain attraction with a woman. And it's much higher risk for a lower reward for most men over a long-term relationship. So the cost-benefit analysis, when you really, really look at it, it's not really in his favor.
See, I really understand why you have the perspective you do.
There's a lot there, I know.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Number one is, again, when it comes to the secular liberal West, I largely agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of what you're saying doesn't track with me with like most of the world.
Yeah.
But if you're talking these like feminist infused, mostly liberal women in US or Canada or whatever, like I don't think most of them would be good marriage candidates. Obviously there's exceptions, and these are big places, 100%. So you can still find a good woman.
Yep. There's lots of them out there, but
but like around the world.
But I mean, like, here's the thing: you could find a great woman, but the problem, you could vet her. She could have all the green flags. She could have very few or none of the red flags.
She can still switch on you.
But it's not her fault. It's his fault, because he's not maintaining the frame of that relationship. You have to blame the guy in situations like that. If they vet a good woman, she has no red flags. She's got green flags. She's useful in his life. She's used the hunting strategy. She's not shared her body with a lot of men. She did it in her youth when she was young, when she would be most valuable. But the problem is that guys get lazy in a long-term relationship, and they think, okay, it's time to relax. And this is where you see guys kick their feet up. They spend way too much time watching sports. They get Cheeto dust on their clothes. They get fat. They're out of shape. They don't continue to chase excellence. They're not looking for a way to ascend. They're not looking for ways to improve themselves. And they just get lazy, and it's a really, really bad look for them. And they also don't manage the relationship. Contempt is the clock that ticks down to every relationship, and a lot of women will test men. It's in their nature. They have to test us.
All of them.
Right? They have to test men, because if they don't test us, they're not going to feel comfortable. They're not going to feel like they have the best that they can do. They're not going to feel secure, and they will test men. And the problem is that most men over time will tend to fail these tests. It's like, it's not a question of whether or not they're going to become betatized. Okay, like I use this term betatization through 1,000 concessions. It starts with, Zuby, don't put your socks over there. Zuby, you have to put your shoes over there. Don't brush your teeth over there. It's going to get on the carpet. And guys, because when we love a woman, we want to please her. We want to make her happy. So we do these things. But in many of these situations, it's important that men understand that sometimes the very things that she's asking us to stop doing or to do more of are actually not good for her or the relationship. And you have to keep doing what you were doing anyway.
Yes.
And a lot of these concepts I explain in my second book, Top Shelf Man.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Your purpose can't your purpose has to be bigger.
Yeah,
your purpose has to be pre-existing. I think when
it's a
when
very
guy
difficult
makes,
conversation, and many of those things that I talk about are not. They don't sit well, with a lot of guys. But I've never had a guy said, "Well, you're wrong about that," and here's why.
Do you know one thing I will say, and I'll say this, is there are also things that work in or are conducive in the sort of dating world or dating market.
Yeah,
which there are things that are useful to bring into a long-term relationship or marriage, and there are other things which are destructive. This is something that I've learned and seen over
such as what?
Over time. What you should bring in?
Yeah, like maybe an example, something you need to bring in, something that would be destructive.
So I see a lot of both men and women, when they are single and dating, they try more. They put in more effort. They put more effort into their appearance,
Correct.
their hygiene, their grooming, going on dates,
Yeah, I would agree with
trying to be attractive and so on.
Yep.
And then they get into a long-term relationship or a marriage and they literally get fat, they get sloppy, they stop even trying to appeal to the person who they love, which is backwards. If anything, it should be more.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It should be more the opposite, right? So I think that's something that people should do. People will say, keep dating your wife, right? I think as a guy, you keep dating your wife. Don't just stop all that because you've got her now. Something that I think is destructive is if someone has been in the sort of modern dating world of plate spinning and seeing, if you're a guy who's able to, juggable multiple women or seeing this one with whatever, then that mentality can be, it can infect a long-term relationship or a marriage where your brain and perhaps even your heart go to the idea of like switching instead of fixing.
Yeah. So what I see, and that's true for women more than it is for men. Like women's promiscuity is far more harmful to her than it is towards men. It's not that it doesn't affect men; it's less harmful.
Yeah, it affects men too.
It does. Yeah, but far less, and to far less of a degree. That goes back to the notion of men's strategy when it comes to finding women, and it's more of a fishing strategy. You have to cast a wide net. So guys have to date multiple women. You can't figure out women, and I'm not suggesting sleep with all of them. Like there's people out there that say, you got to sleep with 50 women to understand women, and I disagree with that.
It's demonic.
But you do have to deal with multiple women to figure out female nature, and you can't contrast and compare. Like you can't figure out what an orange is like unless you've had an apple. You can't figure out what an apple's like unless you've had an orange, sort of thing. It's like there has to be an opportunity for you to deal with multiple women. And then the other key component too that's not understood is that you have to only invite women into your life that have chosen you already. Yes. Most guys make the mistake of very early on, what are we? Where is this going?
Yeah.
Would you like to be my girlfriend? I think that seems to be like the go-to strategy for most men. I make a joke about it. For most men, their sexual strategy is, well, she touched my pee-pee and she responds to my text, so I'm going to marry her, sort of thing. Fine. That doesn't seem to work out very well for most people.
Do you know what's crazy? For like the sort of high school sweetheart types, it actually tends to work out pretty well.
It tends to a lot of the times, but also women go through different like areas of their life. Like I have a friend of mine that was married for 25 years, and as soon as his wife's friends started getting divorced, guess what happened?
Contagion.
She decided to get divorced. Got to go live your best life.
I'll tell you one more thing that's actually very important is like the pool you're swimming in. Yeah. When I say that, I mean like the society and the culture.
Well, smart women don't hang
so
around women that are cancerous. I was talking to my buddy last night. He lives here. He's originally from Toronto. He's Muslim. And, we were talking about relationships, and he was saying that his wife would get rid of women that had any adoption of feminist Western values. And he would say to her, like, why don't you talk to her anymore? And she would say, well, she doesn't believe in the values that I hold. She believes in feminism, or she believes in something resembling that, right? So it's like, she would put distance and remove that person from her life. He didn't need to set that boundary. He didn't need to, like, it was a choice and a decision that she made for the betterment of the marriage. She doesn't have any interest in getting divorced. She doesn't have any interest in following any of those notions. But like the notion of like things like eat, pray, love, and a lot of women actually start to get divorced around the time of menopause as well too, because their hormone panel changes. They see the relationship differently. The kids are grown up. They don't see the value in that. And unfortunately, with family law, it enforces his obligations on her.
Yes.
But it never
Not the other way
enforces
around.
her obligations on him.
Yeah.
So she can get, half his stuff and the financial resources. She gets the lifestyle still without having to put up with him, and then hanging out with her girlfriends thinking that they're living their best life, YOLO, whatever, sort of thing. So it can be very, very dangerous from that perspective too.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you that men should be aware of that and should do what they can to reasonably guard against it. And get a prenuptial agreement, guys.
I wish
do
there
it,
was
do it and do it properly.
Yeah, like I wish there was a simpler process or a more streamlined solution to all of this.
So do I.
And I have some ideas about it. I mean, you could disincentivize divorce by reforming family law.
Yep.
Of course, there's some tremendous
It's unfair.
differences that could be modified. The problem is, a lot of times, women will say to men, well, I want to get married, I want to have a family, and that sort of thing. And guys will say, well, I'm not really willing to live in a way that looks like marriage, sort of thing. And then, women will get mad. And it's funny because a lot of these guys that I talk to, they'll say something, well, if you're so pro-marriage, which I am as well, and I want to have children as well, why aren't you getting the girls together and lobbying on Capitol Hill or Parliament to change the legislation to make it more balanced? Like it's completely in women's favor. And you're never going to see women want to petition to change those laws. They only change laws that don't benefit them or don't strongly allow them to, come out the other end with an advantage. So there has to be some change to family law.
Yes, I
there
agree.
has to be a return to conventional masculinity. There has to be a return to prioritizing family formation for women in their youth. Men have to focus on creating value. Women have to put off things like climbing the corporate ladder, partying, traveling the world. And again, in their early 20s, when their value is highest, when they're most fertile, when they're capable of having children, when they're going to be a better fit for all that, prioritize that. And it's weird because it's only the West that we tell women, skip getting married, go party, sleep with a bunch of guys, get degrees, and then they end up in their 30s making $250,000 a year, junior VP of some department of something or another in marketing, complaining that there's no good men out there.
Do you know what I think? I think similar to the whole migration thing and all the issues going on with our countries. I think over time it will naturally sort itself out.
Everything sorts itself out naturally over time.
Yeah.
You can't put off the inevitable. You can try, you can fight it, but like we talked about earlier, even in places like Sweden, an egalitarian type of society, women still naturally, gravitate to childcare and nursing, and men naturally gravitate to engineering and masculine feats, right?
Yeah. Rich, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. Where can people find and follow you online? And I know you've got a book out, so feel free to do a plug.
Go centrally located at richcooper.ca, or if you're looking for the books, just go to Amazon, look for Richard Cooper, and search for The Unplugged Alpha, which is my first book, or Top Shelf Man, which is my second book that I just released a month ago.
My man. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.